Hello and welcome to the second podcast we're about to produce, which is on glucose fructose ratios. Uh, could be quite an intense subject, I think, Cav, because we've got some detail and some science to go into, but we'll try and keep it as light-hearted as we possibly can do. Uh, we probably didn't go too much into our backgrounds on the previous podcast, so we'll do a little bit of that just to kick off with, so you know that who myself and Cav are. I'm the owner of TORQ. I'm Matt. My background, I did a sports science degree probably back in 1992 I graduated, whereas Cav is a little more recent than that. I worked in health clubs for quite some time, and then I became an elite mountain biker, and I coached athletes on the scene for a number of years. So my background is very much applying the sports science to elite athletes, and obviously writing a lot of articles and bits and pieces on the subject. Cav, your background, you're a little bit more current than myself.
Yeah, so I started my athletic career, should I say, as an athlete myself. I'm a road cyclist, really, and I was also big into time trialing, won a few national titles, got a national record. But then after that, I went to uni. I did a BSc in mathematics and sports science at Loughborough. And I continued my studies there and did a master's in physiology nutrition, doing a dissertation in WBAL alongside Alex Welburn, which is really interesting. And then obviously, I'm now here at TORQ, but on the side and whilst I was at uni, I've been a performance coach and consultant for about 5 years now.
Brilliant. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of a background to us. We've got the kind of the old and the new. So I'd like to think I've got quite a bit of experience in the area, having worked with athletes, having sort of coached myself as well to a high level, and obviously Cav has performed at an incredibly high level. He didn't say that he's got a master's in sports physiology as well, so incredibly qualified to have this conversation. The subject is glucose fructose ratios, which sounds a little bit daunting, doesn't it? But it all comes down to when you fuel for exercise, what we all fuel with carbohydrate, of course, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's what's in that carbohydrate, how is that carbohydrate formed, and what is the balance between glucose and fructose, which are the two main carbs that are hot topics in the fueling world. But if we just cover first of all, really the purpose of fueling, what is the point in, you've got a big race coming up tomorrow. We're not going to go into the details of carb loading, but obviously we're going to be trying to get plenty of carbs into our system so that we can store carbohydrate as much as possible. But I don't know, Cav, if you want to just give your opinions, and I think the whole point of this is really hopefully there won't be too much of a monologue between the two of us on this subject, but we can fill in each other's gaps, and we're bound to both be able to bring something to the table here. But on the subject of fueling, why do you feel that fueling is so important as opposed to just eating lots of carbs the day before?
Yeah, fueling's important is just simply because we can only store so many carbohydrates in our body. We store carbohydrate as glycogen, and unfortunately that's a limited store. So we've only got enough for around 60 to 90 minutes of intense exercise.
About 500 grams, isn't it?
Yeah.
500 grams of stored glycogen.
And for a lot of us, that's not enough. Like a lot of us that race or do different sports, 90 minutes isn't enough. Say footballers, that's on the edge of 90 minutes. Cycling, many people race for 5 hours. Ironman, triathlon, all different sports can last longer than 90 minutes. So it's really important to consider how we can top up or spare the fuel that we have in our bodies whilst we're competing or even training.
Yeah, and exactly, it's exactly the case. if we've got a limited supply of carbohydrate, when that runs out, I think we talked about it in our last podcast, you hit the wall, or you bonk, as it's called in cycling, so you get a catastrophic loss of power. And I think one thing I've always noticed when I've spoken to people is people seem to, without a bit of education, they seem to leave fueling a little bit late. They tend to not feel that the moment they start exercising, they should be fueling. And there's a real logic to the fact that if you've got a finite supply of carbohydrate in your body and you start ripping through that the moment you start exercising, it's really important that you start to get fuel in at the early stages of your competition or your training session, because that it means that you're burning that fuel that you're taking on board through energy drinks, energy gels, that kind of thing. You're burning that instead of your stores. So as you said, Cav, it gives you that kind of sparing effect. So your stores last longer.
Yeah, and something that's discussed a lot about is like fat metabolism and like physiological change markers. So like LT1, changes in threshold. Even below LT1, we're still using we're still using carbohydrate. So it still needs to be a consideration, even if you're just doing some easy exercise or something. If you're doing it for a prolonged period of time, fueling is still massively important as well.
And I think you were mentioning as well in our discussion this morning about the effect that carbohydrate has on protecting your muscle breakdown as well.
Yeah. So if we run out of glycogen or carbohydrates in our body, muscle damage in our body becomes quite apparent. You'll notice it as long as part of hitting the wall. You'll also be in a worse way the day after. Whereas if we do fuel our training or racing, we'll recover much quicker and we'll notice it a lot less.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the bottom line is really by fueling with carbohydrate during exercise, you're delaying the onset of fatigue. You're sparing your glycogen so you can last and sustain a strong pace for longer. And the other thing that we often talk about is affording a higher pace. So it means that if you've got a marathon to run and you're fueling properly for it, you can confidently push at a higher pace and get a PB without worrying about hitting the dreaded wall. And I know that's something that comes up quite a lot in, with people doing marathons and these endurance events. They dread hitting that wall. So it's all about proactive fueling. But that's the general gist. We have covered that in our last podcast. What we want to get on to now really is there's a lot of debate and there's been a lot of research on different blends of glucose and fructose in these products. So when we talk about fueling, we're talking about energy gels, energy drinks primarily. You've got jellies or chews, you've got energy bars. But how these products are constructed, there's a lot of science behind how much glucose and how much fructose is in those particular products. And it comes down to the fact that we use two different transporters, Cav, isn't it? That the main transporters within the gut wall, one handles glucose and one handles fructose. Could you expand on that at all?
Yeah, so as we just discussed, eating more carbohydrate is really important to making sure that we're fueling our training and racing. Logic would follow that, well, why not just eat as much carbohydrate as you can? Some people might even be like, oh, well, if you say the more carbohydrate we have, the better, why not just eat 200, 300 grams of carbohydrate an hour? The reason we can't do this is due to the intestinal transporters. There is a limiting factor within our digestive system to the amount of carbohydrate we can absorb, and that leads into the types of carbohydrate we can absorb as well. So there is SGLT1, which is the glucose transporter within our intestine. Research has found that this is limited at about 60 grams an hour. So basically, if you're thinking, oh, the more I eat, the better it'll be, that's not always necessarily the answer. You will be capped at 60 grams an hour of glucose, and eating any more of this won't actually help. And as Matt has just discussed, there's also another transporter, and that's GLUT5. So GLUT5 is a transporter for fructose. As we just discussed as well, glucose fructose ratios can be important, and this is what it leads into. Whilst glucose is capped at 60, we know less about GLUT5 and the amount we can absorb through that. But as we've alluded to, this is where the debate about ratios comes in.
Mm. And I think what's really important there as well, so Cav's saying, obviously if you know, 60, 70 grams, there's, a round number of 60 is about the limit of SGLT1 and glucose. You take on more glucose than that. Not only can't you use it because it's not going into your blood, which is where you need to use it, but also it backs up and it can cause stomach issues. So people trying to consume high levels of carbohydrate just on glucose just doesn't work. And so, yeah, so where you've moved on to, Cav, then is obviously if we've got this independent pathway, GLUT5 for fructose to move in as well, what ratio should we have between the glucose and fructose to get the maximum amount of carbohydrate into our bloodstream?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so
you,
that's
I'll let you carry on.
a big question. But as I've said, with glucose being capped at 60 grams, the ratios we're consuming really should be designed around a cap of 60 grams. And obviously, the fueling we do, we want to fuel the best we can for our training and racing. Up to 90 grams, it's been proven that 2-to-1 is the best ratio.
So that's giving you basically 60 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose.
Yes, exactly.
Two parts glucose, 1 part fructose.
As we've said, the limit's 60 grams. The 2-to-1 at 90 grams an hour puts you at that limit of glucose and also gives you 30 grams of fructose, which
goes through GLUT5.
Which goes through GLUT5, which we can absorb.
Yeah.
But then the question is raised with the fact that athletes and the media is now discussing people taking 120 grams, 150 grams even.
Much higher levels, yeah.
Much higher levels. What does that look like in terms of ratios? Like we've just said, if 60 grams is capped, if SGLT1 is capped at 60 grams of glucose, how are these people getting in this amount of fueling? Is it the correct way forward?
And it's been shown in research, hasn't it? Is actually there are some studies showing that people are oxidizing, so much more carbohydrate. So that the glucose isn't going in. And I think you just alluded it to earlier. It's like the fructose is the unknown.
Yes.
And this is where the ratios start to come in, isn't it? Because basically, from the research seems to suggest that as well as you've got your GLUT5 pathway for your fructose, there's also the activation of GLUT2, which is another transporter, which comes from when you have glucose. Basically, fructose on its own is very well known to cause digestive issues. GLUT5 just working on its own with fructose, it's a terrible fuel, really,
yes.
for a lot of reasons. We'll cover another reason why it's a terrible fuel in a bit, but it's a terrible fuel because GLUT5 just can't handle it. But the moment you introduce glucose to the equation, not only are you getting the passage of S-GLUT1 from glucose, but you're getting the activation of GLUT2 as well, which helps us to absorb more fructose. And it's looking like, this is obviously just sort of it's an active debate, isn't it? It's fair to say at the moment. It's a very active debate. But what it's looking like is that as we start to get to our 60 grams of glucose on our S-GLUT1 transporter, how much fructose can we suck into the body, through GLUT5 and GLUT2?
Yeah, exactly. And this is where it's been debated, and I know for a fact that not other universities. I'm not at university anymore.
You're here.
Universities are now studying maximum carbohydrate absorption in individuals in different ratios and in different carbohydrate amounts. So it is actively discussed, and people are trying to find the answers to the maximum levels of fructose and what that might look like.
And so where we then end up is, if we assume that, as Cav said, 90 grams of carbohydrate, a 2-to-1 ratio means that you're getting 60 grams of glucose, which is perfect. You're getting 30 grams of fructose. What if your body can absorb more fructose than that 30 grams? Where do we go from here? You can't carry on necessarily with 2-to-1 because you start to oversaturate your S-GLUT1 carrier as you start to take more volume in. So the ratio between glucose and fructose must start to change as you start to take in higher amounts of carbohydrate.
Yeah, exactly. So say if we're still using the 2-to-1 ratio and we're taking like 120 grams, obviously that's way more than the 60 that I've discussed. So it follows that
80-40.
yeah, yes, it follows that something needs to change,
Mm,
and as we've discussed, that the if we keep capping the glucose at 60, the ratio of fructose needs to increase.
yes.
So say we're doing 120 grams an hour, 1 to 1 is
That's the
the
theory.
hot
Yeah, the hot topic.
hot topic, yeah. And then obviously within that, if we're keeping glucose at 60 grams, in between 90 and 120, there's scope to adjust that ratio.
Mm. Yeah, so the ratios that are kind of talked about most are 2-1, and there's a lot of products that are 1-0.8 at the moment, which is, it's an interesting number. But um, then you've got 1-1, which is a real hot topic of conversation, which we're going to talk about in detail because we're launching a product that's 1-1 for these reasons. And as you've said, Cav, at 1-1. At 120 grams of carbs now, you're getting 60 grams of glucose, which is perfect, and you're getting your 60 grams of fructose. And the
Yeah,
studies, there's two, one study is back from early 2000s.
2005.
2005, yeah, you're better than me on that one. And then there's one that's just literally just appeared, and both are showing the highest levels of carbohydrate oxidation ever recorded. And so basically, what seems to happen is that as you move up through consuming more and more carbohydrate per hour, the ratio moves from 2-1 to 1-1. And so this is why we've been, studying this for quite a long time. And what this allows us to do with TORQ now is with the launch of our 1-1 products, which are designed specifically for high carbohydrate intake. If you want to sit somewhere between 90 and 120 grams of carbohydrate, you have that option. You can use a combination of 2-1 and 1-1 if you
Yeah.
want to. But I guess it comes down to an individual basis. Do you want to be going up to 90 grams of carbohydrate an hour, or do you want to be doing these kind of mega high intakes of 120 plus? And is there room for somewhere in between? I mean, of course, there is room for somewhere in between, isn't there? I suppose. I mean, people might want to work up to those higher levels, but do you think the general idea should be that people decide whether they are a 2-1 or a 1-1, Cav?
Yes and no.
Mm.
So there's two things here. Obviously we can adapt our diet, fueling, everything every day.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changes, and we can control that. So, for example, one day you might be racing, the next day you might be recovering, or you might go for a cafe spin. These different training sessions or events obviously have different calorific and macro requirements.
Yeah, yeah.
So it makes sense to me that we're not necessarily a 2-1 or a 1-1, and that it requires a bit of nuance in terms of what your requirements are for that day.
Which is called fuel for the work required, isn't it? Is a big saying in the
Yes,
sports science world.
it's a big thing at the minute as well. So being able to adapt your diet day to day, depending on what's required of your body, and what you want and what you're expecting of the day. So linking that to what we're just discussing, say you're racing, 120 grams, brilliant. Making sure that you're getting everything you can, but then you say if you're going for a cafe spin, 2-1, much better for the lower fueling. As I've said, up to 90 grams proven to be the best, and then you're not over consuming anything. You're not consuming high amounts of fructose without the glucose present, and then yeah, it's just about adapting what you're doing to what's going on in the day.
Yeah, and it's an important thing to bring up at the moment as well that for most people, I mean, I know from my racing days that fueling on 90 grams of carbohydrate an hour you've got to put some mental focus to that. There's a lot of people out there that are probably lucky to be hitting 60 grams of carbs an hour, and we still consider that to be a decent level of fueling for most people, because they need to make some effort to get to 60 grams of carbs an hour. So I think you need to decide on how seriously you want to be taking your fueling, and what the situation dictates. So if you have got a really important event and you want to get the best possible result from it, then you should be looking at trying to get the most amount of carbohydrate per hour in, shouldn't you? I mean, that's the theory behind it. But what we can't do is, if somebody is prepared to compromise and they're comfortable and they're happy on a lower intake, they could still get a great performance, can't they? But they may not necessarily get the best out of their theoretical best.
Yeah, exactly. There's obviously things to weigh up, like I've alluded to, that there is some individual differences. Um, but say you wanting to feel 120 grams, but you keep getting distress. Um,
And you sort of
Obviously,
stomach distress type
yeah,
thing, yeah.
it's obviously worth considering the fueling you're used to and what is realistic for you going into
Mm.
that race. There's no point, obviously, putting
If
yourself
some
in.
people just won't be able to necessarily tolerate it, they'll try it, and they've therefore got to find the best solution for them.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But we do know the gut's trainable, so it's always worth thinking
Yeah.
about making progress. Practicing and training, it's always better to practice in training than it is racing.
Mm.
You don't want to come unstuck on something you've not done before. So building up to that 120.
Hmm.
This is also another key point is that, as we've discussed, like 1 to 0.8 might be a good ratio between 90 and 120 grams an hour. If we're moving from 90 to 120 to help, it could be good to mix products in terms
Mm.
of a 2 to 1 and a 1 to 1 that we do,
Hmm.
and build up to that over time.
Yeah, because everything that we do is based on a unit system. So we've got our TORQ units, which are our 2 to 1 units, and we've got our new advanced TORQ units. So obviously, if you're going to go for 3 an hour, 3 2 to 1 units is 90 grams of carbs. 3 1 to 1 units is 120 grams of carbs because the units are larger. So a TORQ unit is 30 grams of carbs. An advanced TORQ unit is 40 grams of carbs. So if you do the maths, it's 90 and 120. But what you're saying there, Cav, is by mixing the two, you could have 2 2 to 1 units and 1 1 to 1, and that would be your first stepping stone, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly.
And then your next stepping stone would be 2 1 to 1 and 1 2 to 1,
Yeah,
and then you can practice, like you say, your gut training, your body to be able to consume more and more, and then you move on to the 120 plus, which would then be your 1 to 1. The other thing that we need to cover as well is the desirability of glucose over fructose. So um, it's really important, isn't it, Cav, that you always aim to saturate your glucose transporter, to get the most amount of glucose you can. So
yes,
that kind of 60 grams. And that's because it's glucose is much more readily available. It's much easier for your body to burn. Fructose has to go through into the liver and get processed. It's a slower process to turn that into
yeah,
glucose. So that was the one thing as well, is that you really, this is why the ratios need to change, because as you take on more per hour, you just want to hit that magic 60, don't you, all the
yes,
time?
exactly. Yeah. That's the key point, and why these ratios are changing is that we know 60 is the glucose cap, and if say we're like someone wants to take 120 grams or 150 grams and using the 2 to 1, you just got glucose sat in your stomach, and like you've alluded to, when we've got things sat and not processing, that can cause distress.
Causes stomach distress. And the other thing as well is, for the same reasons, it's imperative that we get across that there is really no benefit in taking 1 to 1 at the lower levels, because for two reasons. Firstly, we mentioned at the start that high fructose concentrations are really not very good for the gut. They need that glucose saturation to help to draw them
Yeah,
through. So you start to take a 1 to 1 product at lower levels, and you could also risk gastric
yeah,
distress. But also, you're getting a higher level of fructose compared to glucose, which is less desirable because fructose isn't as useful as glucose, as we've been
yes,
saying. So
yeah, yeah,
I think the bit that we really do need to get across is that 2 to 1 absolutely has its place, and probably for most people, including myself, I'm going to be saying, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to use 1 to 1 if I suddenly have a big race and event that I'm going to do. But generally speaking, I'm going to be using 2 to 1 because that suits my general fueling requirements. I'm not racing so much, and I get more than enough for what I need to do at up to 90 grams of carbs an hour. But then there are going to be other people. I think they just need to realise that if they do go down the 1 to 1 route, they do need to commit to those high intakes, don't they?
yeah, exactly. If you're not consuming enough, obviously we're not saturating the glucose. There's risks of stomach distress if you're not taking enough, obviously, because of, like you've said, there been more fructose present. Something we actually discussed before this is if you're going out in a race and say, well, it's just been the women's and junior men's sickle this weekend. It could always be good to have the opportunity to mix stuff. Say 2 to 1. The 1 to 1s that we do is, say you're in a crash or you have punctures and you thrown off your fueling schedule. If you've under consumed 1 to 1, there might be a little bit of risk there of gastric distress. But if you want to hit those high numbers, maybe carrying a 2 to 1 and being able to mix it up a little bit on the move. And
yeah, because it's an unknown, isn't it? You don't know what might happen.
Yes.
And if there's something that forces you into a lower level of fueling because that's just what you need to do, then you need to switch your tactics,
yes,
don't you?
yeah, exactly.
So no, there's absolute validity in that. I think, I think with the gastric discomfort as well. I mean, I was watching a lecture at iSenk with Asker Dukendrup, and he mentioned about as well as gut training whilst you're riding your bike or running and during exercise, that actually the food you eat is a form of gut training. So if you're consuming, if you want to get your body better at dealing with fructose, consuming fruit and things that have fructose in them is all part of the training process. And obviously, as endurance athletes, we need a lot of carbs anyway, don't we? So if you're wanting your body to accept fructose, at this high intensity and in large amounts while you're exercising, it's practicing during exercise, but also looking at your diet in general and looking at where you can get those, get your body practicing, I guess, getting your gut practicing during those periods as well.
Yeah, definitely. As we know, for especially elite, that we're not talking 3 or 4 percenters. We're talking 1 percenters and half percenters, and doing everything you can to make sure you're the best for race day is important. So taking every opportunity you can to repair your body. For those people that are consuming 120 grams an hour in the racing, it's worth a consideration or a thought.
We've kind of bounced around this subject a fair bit, we could bring it to some kind of conclusion, really, as to we're going to be continuing asking the question, I think, of you guys, and I think through our sort of advertising of the new 1-to-1 Proto range that we're doing, are you 2-to-1 or are you 1-to-1? And I think that's the question I feel that people need to ask themselves. And it doesn't mean that you have to be one or the other, but for today's ride, am I 2-to-1?
Yes, exactly.
Or and this comes down to fuel for the work required. It's pointless if you're going out for a tempo ride and you're going out for a few hours and you're well below race pace, going out and slamming 120 grams of carbohydrate an hour into your body. And therefore, your 2-to-1 is absolutely where you want to be, somewhere between 60 and 90 grams, would you say? So obviously depending on the intensity.
Yeah, I'd say so. Obviously, like we've said, you've got a stored amount of fuel, and if you're not going to deplete that, obviously you want to be topping up as you're going along. If you're not depleting it and also you don't have massive fueling requirements, there is no need to be consuming these high amounts. So
no, absolutely. And just a little bit of a background, because obviously we've talked about the ratios. Any questions that you have, drop us an email. You can get in contact with us. It is a hot area of debate, and we're really excited. We're launching this new 1-to-1 Proto range, so you've got the full range of 2-to-1 products available, which as we're saying, for the vast majority of people and vast majority of occasions are absolutely on the money. But for those that are really wanting to push their carbohydrate intake levels to a much higher level for competition purposes, we have just brought out 3 new 1-to-1 Proto gels. We've got one with caffeine, which is forest fruits, and we've got a strawberry yogurt, and we've got a naked gel as well. So 3 gels, all containing 40 grams of carbs. And we've also got 3 energy drinks. We've got an orange, a blackcurrant, and again a naked. And the beauty of the naked flavours are that we kind of feel that because people are going to be consuming large amounts of carbs, have a little bit of a break from the flavour is actually quite a nice thing to do. And it comes down to individuals. Some people just love the flavours and they just want to keep them going in. But I think especially when it gets to kind of quite long, lengthy races, I think those drinks and gels, the naked ones, will be quite popular, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Palate fatigue when you're training a lot of hours and racing is definitely a consideration. Like you discuss with people, and they just eventually start craving like pastries, breads, pizzas, and stuff. So being able to mix up the flavor is key, especially to keep it interesting,
Mm.
psychologically stimulating. If it becomes a chore to fuel, then you're not going to be fueling as well as you can be.
It is about, yeah, we've always wanted to create sort of a variety of flavours and textures. And I think at this kind of high level fueling, I mean, obviously we'll keep our eye on the ball and we can do more and more as things progress. But we've got a really good range there and it fits in with our regular fueling system, which is basically if it's hot weather and you're sweating a lot, you drink more of your advanced torque units. And if it's cooler and perspiration rates are lower, you can consume more of your gels and less of your drink. The drinks all have all your 5 electrolytes in as well, so it naturally manages itself. You know, if it's a drinking day, then you just drink a lot more of your units through your electrolyted drink, and if it's cooler and you don't need so many electrolytes and fluid, then you'll eat more. So it's that same adaptive system that we've got with the regular fueling system, but it's with 1-to-1. It's all about 3 advanced units. There's no, so we can basically, I think in summary, from 2-to-1 through to 1-to-1, you've got 1 torque unit an hour is 30 grams of carbs at 2-to-1. 2 torque units is 60 grams of carbohydrate at 2-to-1. 3 torque units is 90 grams of carbohydrate at 2-to-1. And then 3 advanced torque units is 120 grams of carbohydrate at 1-to-1. And then, as we've discussed, you've got that bit between 90 and 120. We kind of feel you need to commit to one or the other, but there are situations where you need to be fluid and that you can actually adapt and mix the products, can't you?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So I don't know if you had anything else to bring up on this subject, Cav. Have we missed anything off?
I don't think so.
I think we've
I
pretty
think
much covered everything,
we've
haven't
covered
we?
everything we were here to cover. Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully you found that interesting and yeah, reasonably intense, and it wasn't light-hearted at all, was it?
Yeah.
Cheers then. Thank you.
Cheers.